All right. So, something that you might be thinking of is, can we do static and final? And the answer is yes. So that's what we're going to break down. We're going to break down the final thing we're going to do is we're going to break down the words static and final, and then tell you an example where we might do static and final. Okay. So static would be something that's shared by all the balls, right? So we have num balls would be a good static variable, right? It belongs to the class balls, right? And a good static method would be something that also belongs to the class balls, right? We had the integer example, the big I integer example in the last question. And here we had, I don't know, like double num balls or something like that. Int double num balls, int double num balls, okay? And it would return that integer, okay? Now, final, right, is something that's set once, and then you can never set it again, okay? And so if we wanted the ellipse width and height to be the same after it being set, we might make those final, right? Ellipse width and ellipse height. And that kind of makes sense. We'd say, look, we don't want you to keep on changing the width and height. Once you decide on a width and height, that's it, all right? Unlike our other variables, right? Position's changing, velocity can change, right? But width and height, we maybe want to keep constant. And I'm just using it here so that you have an example. Now, static final or final static, it doesn't matter. You can put them either way you want. So static final static int, static final int, whatever, right? Typically, I think it's this way. Final static, static final. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And what you're gonna do with these are, well, they're the same for every instance. So ball A, ball B, ball C, they belong to the class, right? And you set them once and then they have to stay, okay? So they have to be given a value immediately. And typically these are our maybe limits, right? So if you wanted to limit the velocity of all the balls, right, you might have a constant that's the upper limit of velocity. So you might say static final int max vx, okay? And yeah, let's just make it caps because that's what you're gonna see a lot. Max vx, okay? That's the max velocity x, and we make it equal to 5 pixels, okay? Which means if it's going more than 5 pixels per update cycle, that's no good. So that's the maximum we want, okay? And then in the setters and the constructor, we can make sure it never gets set to more than that, okay? And if someone tries to set it to more than that, well, maybe we have a default velocity x value that we actually set it to. So if it tries to get set to more than that, we might have a static final int default vx. Oh, you can capitalize it. And we might say, hey, that'll be 1, okay? So if someone tries to set the velocity x to a value it shouldn't be set to, we set it to 1, okay? So that's static final. We can look at it real quickly. Am I prepared enough to do this? Okay, we can do it here. So let's say we were like, all right, so we're gonna go public static final int max vx. All right, and then we'll set it equal to 5, right? So you're not going above 5 pixels, right? And so of static final max min vx, okay, min vx, and we'll set it equal to -5. So you're not going below -5, all right, for the velocity x, right? So we have a maximum velocity, and then finally I guess we wanted to do a default velocity x, so we could do that real quickly. Public default vx, okay, and that was just going to be 1, right? So if someone tries to set it to a value it shouldn't be set to, we're just going to set it to 1. All right, and then we can change this down here to reflect that. So we can say if initial velocity x, right, is greater than what am I gonna say? Is greater, is less than, right? Is less than or equal to? Less than or equal to, right? We'll let max Vx and initial velocity x is greater or equal to min Vx, right? Something like that. What we're going to do is we will set the velocity. Okay. Cool. So we've set the velocity x, right? Otherwise, it's going to equal our default velocity, right? Otherwise, velocity x equals our default Vx. So if one of these happens to be violated, remember with the and, both sides have to be true, right? So if initial velocity x is not less than or equal to max Vx, so they try to, I don't know, set it to 6 pixels, right? Or the velocity to 6, which is 6 pixels in our case. Or the initial velocity x is less than the minimum velocity x, so they tried to go past -5, right? Then we're going to set it to the default value. Otherwise, we'll use their value that they pass in, because they passed in a legitimate value. We could do the same scheme in the setters. In fact, we should do the same scheme in the setters. But it's basically the same thing. You would just copy and paste this, and you would change initial velocity to whatever's being passed into the setter, right? To whatever parameter is being passed into the setter. And then this would work essentially the same. So hopefully that makes sense, right? So we have static, we have final, and we have static final. So these could be static final, right? Ball height and ball width, we could just make static. Not static, I'm sorry, final. That'll get me in trouble if I make it static. Final, right? Because they're not changed once they're set, right? And number of balls, well, that's an example of something we can make static, right? And the method, number of balls times 2, did I put that in here? Yeah, num balls times 2 is a method that could be static, right? Because it can be called without actually having an instance of ball. So hopefully that makes sense. You've probably seen all these terms before, so I wanted to kind of go into it, all right? They're important, and they'll get more and more important as time goes on. Right now, they're not super important, but we'll start incorporating them into our classes just so that you get used to them and so that it's second nature, all right? So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.